Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Bird Undead or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by the avid reader _ sometimes writer, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Angela.
Bird Undead, Chapter 10. Home.
Bellwether. Private.
Wake up. We'll be landing any minute now. A firm but gentle hand softly shaking her right shoulder pulls Abigail back awake, recognizing the low voice of her sergeant. Already? Thank you, she yawns, blinking the fog out of her eyes and brain until she can meet the older witch's eyes with a short nod. Good luck waking caller, she insisted, and I quote, "Bother Bellwether first, she's the boss and the one who didn't get stabbed twice," before ignoring me. Anacostia tells her, sounding mildly amused by the blonde's antics. Yeah, that sounds right. I've got the shitbird, Sarge, Abigail chuckles, shaking her head and fighting off another yawn. There will be coffee on the ground and probably breakfast before we have to get in the transport, the sergeant promises, before moving away to check in with the rest of the witches further up in the bay. Thank the goddess for that. I could use a coffee right about now, the blaster mutters to herself with a sigh. She looks down at her still sleeping unit mate in her lap. The fixer had rolled at some point to face her. Abigail's jacket pulled in tightly around herself, and her knees pulled up so that almost her entire body is under the fabric. Collar, we're about to land. You've got to get up, the taller witch tries softly, shifting her feet and legs to jostle her companion. Bells, it's too early, Rael whines petulantly, trying to bury her face against the folded jacket that serves as her improvised pillow. Believe me, I know. I don't want to be awake either right now, but we have to. And Anacostia said that there'll be probably coffee and food before we get back to base. Abigail agrees, running her fingers through the blonde hair again sympathetically. She can't help a small smile at the pathetic groan that comes from the smaller girl as she cracks one bloodshot eye partially open to look at her. Her companion is still so clearly exhausted, and she feels the same. But if she can just manage to get them both through the day, they can hopefully sleep again as much as they need to later. Okay, if I let you sleep just a little longer through the landing, do you promise not to fight me when I have to wake you up again? The blaster offers, still playing with her hair. Yeah, thank you, Abs. Can you do the hard things today? Please? I can't. The fixer quickly accepts, with a nod against her lap. Her request coming out as almost a plea while she adjusts to rest her forehead and the bridge of her nose against the warm softness of Abigail's lower stomach. I will if I can. I promise, Ray. The taller girl agrees quietly, with a slight shiver at the unexpected contact. She feels her companion's breathing deepen again and relaxes back against the netting to wait. Anacostia gives her a pointed look from across the cargo bay when she sees the smaller witch still asleep. But Abigail returns it with a dismissive wave of her free hand. The plane stays on final approach for the next almost 20 minutes before finally descending, and the blaster's only half surprised that her unit mate doesn't stir in the slightest while the wheels touch down and they start to taxi to wherever they'll be parked. She thinks they taxi for about 10 minutes before she hears the engines cut off and the bay ramp starts to descend slowly. Rael, we're on the ground and you promised you'd wake up now, Abigail reminds patiently, while she moves her knees to gently jostle the blonde again. I hate that I did that, The fixer huffs through a yawn. The taller witch chuckles lowly at that and removes her hand from her companion's hair to let her sit up. Rael grumpily does so and yawns a second time, while she begrudgingly starts to stretch to wake herself up further. The blaster redons her jacket and reaches under her seat to grab her belt and sword. The blonde unfolds and pulls on her strike jacket as well, and they rise to their feet after the ramp has settled and their sergeant has come to join them. Let me have the sword and that knife. You can't walk onto base with those, but I can if I say that they're from General Amara's team to be further examined upon her return. It is not out of the ordinary for her to send anything she finds odd or interesting back ahead of her from an expedition, the older witch tells them, holding her hand out expectantly. I promise they'll be in your dorm room by the time you make it there, Anacostia reassures patiently, not withering under Abigail's wary scrutiny. Fine, she finally agrees, begrudgingly handing both blades over. She feels naked without the sword's steady weight within arm's reach, even with the scourge hooked in place on her hip. They follow their sergeant off the plane last after the other strike witches, and Abigail is relieved to find a small table with coffee and various breakfast pastries waiting for the returning team and aircrew. She's quick to fill one of the disposable cups with the dark brew and doctor it to her specifications before snapping on the lip and taking a long sip. Anacostia is doing the same, looking just as pleased, and Rael is carefully spreading cream cheese across 2 halves of a bagel with a glazed donut hanging partially out of her mouth to keep her hands free for her current task. The blaster grabs one of the cartons of orange juice for the blonde, since her hands are full, well aware of her unit mate's preference for the citrus over coffee in the mornings, before they're being led to one of the still purring Hummers in the waiting convoy. They slide in across from their sergeant, and the doors close behind them with a loud thump. The fixer has finally finished her donut and is now working on the bagel, when the Humvee's engine rumbles louder, and they start to roll forward slowly. They're off the tarmac and onto an actual road, and Rael is halfway through the bagels. Abigail hands her the carton, getting a surprised but grateful look in thanks, since the smaller witch's mouth is full. She's content to sip at her coffee, comforted by the warmth it emanates between her palms, while she looks out the heavily tinted window. The ride back is silent, and they've all finished their respective breakfasts and beverages in the 20 or so minutes the drive takes. The Humvee slows when it passes the entry gates to the base, and begins its roll up the driveway alone, while its fellows peel off in different directions. Home sweet home, Rael mutters as they finally stop, but she doesn't sound as bitter as she usually would. Abigail watches as she seems to shore up her walls and brace herself for whatever their day is going to throw at them. The taller witch does the same, and Anacostia seems to wait for them to finish before she nods and pushes open the heavy door. She's walking off with their souvenirs when Abigail steps out with Rael on her heels. The blaster stops dead in her tracks when she spots the surprisingly accurately described anxious form of her mother waiting for them. Petra's eyes are wet, and she wrings her hands, shifting forward when their eyes meet, as if fighting down the urge to break through her tightly wound properness and run to her daughter. Abigail finds she's unsettled by his side, and her feet are moving quickly before she even realizes it. She's startled for the briefest instant to be pulled into a tight hug by her normally so formal mother, and takes the rare moment to press her chin against the older bellwether's shoulder and hug her back. She hides her wince at the quick burn of pain the tight embrace causes to her chest wound, but can't stop the tears of what she thinks might be relief, or maybe just a final release of how overwhelmed she is with the stress that she's been holding in over the last week, that slipped down her face as she breathes in her mother's familiar scent. She lets it comfort her while the older witch holds her securely and sways them slightly from side to side with such palpable relief. I'm sorry, Abigail tries shakily when the embrace breaks, her eyes still wet and her bottom lip quivering. Petra's hands don't seem to want to or even be able to leave her yet, as they settle into a soft grip on her upper arms. She feels so small, like a little girl again in the face of her mother, still reeling from the surprising tenderness and affection from the older bellwether woman. She can count on one hand the number of times in her life she's been given anything similar by a general. Don't. Petra cuts her off with a slight squeeze of her arms and the gentlest shake. Her voice is still tight and tearful sounding, even having only gotten out a single word, It makes Abigail almost snap her mouth shut on reflex, but this time not because she has to bite back words she wants to say next. This time, she has no words beyond the apology. I am so very proud of what you did. It was a classic bellwether move, against the odds, in the face of oblivion, full of grit and the kind of sisterhood this army was built on. The elder bellwether continues, shaking her again slightly, and Abigail can only nod, feeling her eyes burn with more tears, and her throat tighten while she tries to keep them back. You may be the greatest bellwether yet, my daughter, Petra finishes, cupping her face proudly as she speaks, her voice thick and rough with emotion. Her thumbs gently smooth away the few tears Abigail hadn't felt escape, and she gives her mother a watery smile. Ma'am, do you happen to know what the plan is for us today? Or if there's any chance we could see Tally? Rael's voice wanders hesitantly from her right. The blaster can almost feel the discomfort coming from the blonde for interrupting, and they're both surprised when Petra pulls the shorter witch into just as tight a hug as she had her daughter with a sigh. It's understandably shorter, but no less relieved or sincere, and she rests her grip on the fixer's upper arms and shoulders too, for a few seconds when she pulls back before she seems to collect herself again and move away fully. I was originally supposed to bring you up to General Alder's office to be debriefed, but a situation has come up that requires her full attention at the moment, and we're unsure of how long it'll take to be resolved. As for your unit mate, she answered one of the highest callings. It's the highest honor a soldier can achieve in being selected to serve General Alder in such a way. But due to the circumstances of how it took place, she's been given the rare option to be released from her duty to the General as soon as a replacement has been selected, and she's accepted it. It might take a few days, as we require General Amara for the ritual, and because there are now stricter parameters that need to be met in light of our current climate. Thankfully, half of the work is already done by having candidates already in their training in case a situation like this arises where a new biddy is needed. The candidates are carefully screened before they're even selected as a potential option, and they undergo sometimes years of training and testing until the opportunity may occur that they be chosen. The ritual and process of being decommissioned isn't without its risks to both the target biddy and the general herself. However, it is one that, while rare, has been done enough times in the past that we're able to prepare for and try to mitigate as many of those risks and potential complications as we can. Don't worry, the elder witch answers before explaining as well as she can. They're both relieved by the news. They're going to get their sister back. Can we be present while the ritual is done? We want to be there for our sister no matter what, the blonde requests hopefully. I can ask, but I don't see it being an issue. I will let you know as soon as I get an answer, Petra promises reassuringly. If we aren't going to be debriefed yet, are we expected to do anything else today? We were cleared by the fixers at the base we were recovered near, but I know we could both use the time to rest more. Abigail wonders, shifting closer to her unit mate when a sudden burst of discomfort hits her at the recognition of their distance from one another. It's not further apart than they've been before the last few days, but for some reason it still makes her wildly uncomfortable and anxious. She doesn't understand it, and she isn't going to try to right now. She just needs to quell it, and quickly. The fact that the smaller witch seems to adjust to stand incrementally closer to her as well, while trying to be casual and inconspicuous, tells the blaster that she must feel it too. Not that I know of. Again, I don't know how long the general will be otherwise occupied. I won't take this second chance for granted. I love you, daughter. Go and take this chance to recover. I'll make sure someone is sent to retrieve you as soon as General Alder is no longer needed and is ready to debrief you. Her mother agrees, seeming almost reluctant to let her out of sight. Abigail's eyes water again, as she can only nod, not trusting her voice before hooking two of her fingers into the cuff of one of Rael's jacket sleeves and leading them away towards the dorms.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.